Okay, so we're dashing off a couple semi-scripted reviews for right at the end of the year, just to get you guys some more. Starting off with Rebel Moon, Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon. So, here's the thing about Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon. This comes with a built-in sob story that is tailor-made for Zack Snyder fans. And, I will say right up front again, I am not an anti-Zack Snyder person, Zack Snyder hater. I have not liked a lot of his recent movies. I've really liked a couple of his early movies, and unfortunately, this one is gonna have to go in the continue to not like column. But you could not ask for a more marketable movie in terms of the current modern follow Zack Snyder to the gates of hell fan base. In this case, the idea that Zack Snyder supposedly went to the makers of current Star Wars movies with a Star Wars pitch, and they said no thank you. And so instead he went to Netflix and said, hey, would you like to make my Star Wars movie with the serial numbers filed off? And they said yes. Which is actually probably the better way for something like this to happen. Like, at this point, I would rather watch a bunch of, nakedly obvious Star Wars ripoffs than movies trying to hide the fact that they're Star Wars ripoffs. I mean, I love the movies that came out right in the wake of Star Wars that were openly acknowledged Star Wars. I own a Blu-ray of Star Crash. I own a Blu-ray of Message from Space. This is not as good as either of those, unfortunately. So, if Zack Snyder wants to make Zack Snyder's Star Wars with a Z Extreme powered by Monster Energy, fine, yeah. Good idea in practice. Unfortunately, it's really dull, which is the last thing you want out of a Zack Snyder movie. There's other movies I can put up with them being underwritten, not making a hell of a lot of sense, being kind of obnoxious, ideologically problematic, but they're usually not boring. And this one is in the same zone as the Zack Snyder's Justice League, which is ambitious and dull. Very, very dull. Some of that might be the way that it is being released, where it's been cut in half for basically no reason. This is a Netflix movie. It could have been as long as they wanted, but instead it is coming out in pieces. I'll talk about that in a minute. Much like the real Star Wars, this is a space movie based on samurai stuff with cowboy and King Arthur stuff grafted onto it, because if you're gonna do a ripoff, just go whole hog, no problem with that. Here they're doing Seven Samurai, or for you Gen Z folks, A Bug's Life. So the idea is that there's a village that's being picked on by not the Empire. Some people have to go and collect a group of heroes to come back and defend the village. So you can see how they would cut that in half, where we spend an entire movie gathering up the group of heroes that are going to come back and defend things, and then end the movie at, okay, now we've got all the guys together, so that the let's defend the village stuff happens in the next one, which is a really bad place to cut a story like this in half. Like, memo to future filmmakers: make a movie inspired by Seven Samurai. Good idea. Do all of the character intros as one whole movie on its own. Bad idea. As a result, this ends up being the Zack Snyder movie that most resembles an anime, in that it's mostly very bad, filled with interchangeable people introducing their backstories, and a lot of its biggest fans will thusly insist that it gets really good if you can just get through the first 3/4 of it. It opens very promisingly, it opens exactly like what I wanted this to be, which is really, really stupid, but with conviction. You can't really count on Snyder to make a smart movie or a good movie, but you can count on him to make something with conviction. And it feels almost like the 300 in Space that you want right at the beginning, with Anthony Hopkins reading this very generic but passionate space fantasy Arthurian bullshit narrative about the families and the houses and the prophecies and legacies, and then a portal shaped like a vagina opens in space and a big space submarine ship pops out, and I'm not even exaggerating, it's unmistakably, hey, what if we make the portal look literally like a giant vagina? Okay, fine, we're just going there. Cool. That's what it should be. Alright, this is the Zack Snyder space movie, that's what it's gonna look like. Alright. And then it immediately runs out of gas after that. And it feels like that the whole way through. Most of this movie, basically the entire movie, is they meet a character, they introduce their backstory, they move on. Sometimes we get an action scene, there's this bit with like a spider woman, that's kind of cool. We also see the not lightsabers in that one. Okay, fine. There's other parts where they just go meet a guy, and then a guy rides a bird monster. Okay, fine. Djimon Hounsou is a gladiator. They make a big deal out of, this guy's a gladiator. He's on the gladiator planet. Remember that Djimon Hounsou was in Gladiator? That's a reference. And then they get there, and there's no gladiator stuff, because they're presumably saving that for the director's cut. And then because this needs to have an action ending, we get a big action scene against the guy I guess was supposed to be our Darth Vader. And there's been so little actual build to this guy that when he comes back into the movie, it's like, oh, this is the guy? All right. Now, there's a mythology to it that's sort of interesting, but not that much. You can kind of see where it's going and what the twist that they're building to is. I sort of like the misdirection twist as to what's going on. It took me longer than I thought to figure it out. I still saw it before it happened. It's mostly comes in from, hey, wait a minute, aren't there two characters? It feels like there's one character too many here. These characters are all very arch, and two of these guys feel like copies of each other in the stock character playbook. But, it's a decent turn. It comes about in a more direct way than I thought. It's not the worst Zack Snyder movie. That's still just kind of a mix of everything he did in the DCEU. But it really is beginning to feel like he peaked at Sucker Punch. He feels like having the freedom to do something like that and getting so slapped down by a studio after that has had a bigger, longer negative effect than we continue to see. I'm sure, even though I'm bending over backwards to be nice about this, guys, but it honestly is just extremely dull. If you're going to make a Star Wars ripoff and file off the serial numbers, you should probably replace it with something more interesting. And at best, this isn't a more Zack Snyder-y Star Wars movie. It's a more Gears of Wars-ish Disney Plus Star Wars TV show. Is it better than something like The Rise of Skywalker? Not really. For the most part, it honestly feels like a slightly grimier, longer cousin to the Obi-Wan show, which I really thought was just okay. So if you're looking for your Star Wars comparison, there you go. But yeah, that's Rebel Moon. For a while I was joking around calling this one Zack Snyder's Mountain Dew Star Wars, but Mountain Dew implies a certain amount of energy expended for the how long, drawn out, and unrealized potential that is involved in this. The end result is more like Zack Snyder's stupider ascending. Call this a 4 out of 10. I'm not looking forward to having to watch several other versions of this and then a whole other movie. Oh well.